Personally, I prefer the earlier version of Past Lab, the X250. The reason for that is they use the TO3 metal can transistors or MOSFET transistors. And then since X250.5, they replace these transistors with plastic ones. The difference is that the plastic transistor, the newer plastic transistor, they're, I think, easier to match because the process is more controlled and it's smaller, and the design and everything assembled would be much simpler. Because of the small body size, the inductance of the internal wire bond is slightly lower than these metal can. Because the metal can, you can imagine there's a die sitting in the center, and then two pins, you need to solder them on with a relatively longer wire. That in general might be considered a little bit worse, but in this case, it's actually better. The reason for that is MOSFET, they have very high capacitance at the drain and the source. Basically around, say, 1200 picofarad or maybe slightly higher, 1300 or so. So that high capacitance, no matter it's a metal can or it's a plastic package, the capacitance is always there because that's on the device. By using these slightly longer bond wires inside the metal can, it actually offset the capacitance slightly and make it much nicer in the audible frequency range. And another reason is that if you look at the internal structure of the TO3 metal can, it looks more like a tube kind of assembly. So it's gives more tubey sound than the plastic device. So that's the reason I think if you get a chance, you can grab one of these earlier Past Labs amps, either X250, this is a 250, or maybe 150 or 350. 250, I think, is the sweet spot in terms of power and in terms of overall channel balancing and so on. So once you get that, you probably want to recap the capacitors for two reasons, right? One is the original capacitor has been almost 20 some years, so it might get dry. A lot of characteristics become worse, and some might simply fail. And another reason is that you want to replace, as I showed you earlier, replace these, originally they're much smaller capacitors, like a 220 micron, a very tiny capacitor, and replace it with them with these larger ones, between say 1000 to 2000 microfarad, because the later version, X250.5, they use these bigger ones. And the reason for the bigger one to be better is that because these larger capacitors are 10,000 microfarad, so you want to step down about 1/10 of that value, which is about 1000 microfarad, instead of a 220 microfarad. So that kind of decoupling capacitor arrangement configuration should be much better, give you more control on the base and more imaging in the mid-range, their area in the high range. So, and again, the recap is relatively simple and straightforward. I think as long as you know how to solder, you have a good solder gun, you work carefully, you can do this by yourself.